Hungarian Folk Tales. Wooden Peter. Once there lived a farmer and his wife. Now these good people didn't have any children, and so one day the farmer said to his wife, "I'm going off into the forest to carve as a child out of wood." Now his wife laughed at this, but the farmer bundled up his stuff and set off into the forest. There he met some wood carvers. "God blessings on you this day. I came to get a small piece of wood." So they chopped him a piece of wood and he started to carve himself a child. It was evening when he returned home, and his wife laughed when she saw he'd brought home a wooden child. They had their supper and there was a little left over. "Now that's just enough for our son." Off they went to bed, and around midnight the boy called out, "Well, mother dear, are you sound asleep?" At that moment they woke up, and great was their surprise to see the wooden boy had come to life. They admired the boy until the break of day, and then the priest baptized him and named him Wooden Peter. When he came to be 3 days old, he asked if he could go out and find himself a friend to play with. "Hey, do you know if there's someone who makes swords in this town?" "Of course there is." So the boy went back into the house. "Father, please could you give me 8 florins? You can have whatever you need." "All I need is 8 florins." And off he went to the sword maker. "Good day to you, good sword maker. Let me have for 8 florins the sword that you first made. That's the one for me." So the sword maker went to the swords and sorted until he found an old rusty sword and a sheath to go with it. Peter took the sword, strapped it on, and it looked like the sword had been made especially for him. "Now, here's your 8 florins, for even your first sword has to be paid for." Next day there was a huge mob of people in the town. As they were moving towards the fair, they heard that there were 2 oxen tethered together with a golden chain. Whoever could cut the chain in 2 could take the oxen as his own. So Wooden Peter stepped up to say, "If you'll permit me, I'll cut the chain." So then Peter set to, and he cut that golden chain with a swish and a swoosh that could be heard across the country, far and near. Up went the tails of the 2 oxen, and they didn't stop trotting until they reached the stable. The owner of the oxen said, "Well, Wooden Peter, off with you home to feed the oxen, but you should know that all they eat is glowing embers." Peter set fire to 12 bundles of wood. When they were aflame, he took the water pail and filled it with glowing embers. The 2 oxen ate them all up, and one of them went off to where the sun rises, one to where the sun sets. So Peter said, "Now, Father, let me show you something." He tapped the corner of the gate with his fingers in 2 places, and from one of them good wine gushed out, and from the other good brandy. "Now, Father, everyone can drink to their heart's content. Do you see that wheelbarrow?" "I do indeed, son." "And that millstone?" "Yes, I see it." "Now, when the barrow stands in front of the door and the millstone jumps into it of its own accord, the wine will turn to water and the brandy to deep red blood, and then you'll know that I am dead. And then, if you want to find me, sit into that wheelbarrow and I'll take you to where I am. Now, I have to go off to see the world and try my fortune." After that, Wooden Peter set off across 7 lands and 7 seas until he came to a town in which there lived a king. "Good day to you, your good majesty." "Welcome you are. And what sort of journey are you on?" "I set off to be of service, to try my fortune." "And how much would you require for a year?" "Nothing at all, only what I eat and what I drink." So Peter stayed in the town, working as a carpenter. He was so clever with his hands that the old king took a liking to him. Now the king had a daughter who fell so in love with Wooden Peter that she thought she would die if she wasn't allowed to marry him. "Well then," said the king, "I won't have you dying on me, so I'll let you give him your hand and be his wife. I'll announce a great wedding feast and you'll live as husband and wife." One day the king received a letter telling him to gather together everyone in the land to go off to fight in the war. When the king saw this, he began to weep. "Now, good Father Majesty, do not weep, for I'll go alone to the war." "My son, what can you do alone? You'll be like a gnat against a bison." But Wooden Peter went off, and he was wielding his sword so fiercely that he beat them one and all. But then he stumbled, and that's how they defeated him. As quickly as they could, they buried him in the ground. In the morning, as the light was dawning, the barrow went to the door. The millstone jumped into it of its own accord. The wine turned to water, and the brandy to deep red blood. So the farmer got into the barrow and went to where Peter had been cut down. He searched for him high and low, but to no avail. Then he saw the two oxen coming. The two oxen began to turn the soil with their horns until they uncovered Peter, but there was no sign of life in him. And so one ox put him back together again, and the other put his soul back into him. And Wooden Peter awoke. I slept so well." "You'd have slept forever if it hadn't been for us," said the oxen. They went home, and the king called the whole court together and crowned Wooden Peter king. And he and his queen lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Water Fairy. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a miller, and the miller had a wife. They had a fine big mill, and they earned their keep and passed their days. There was just one thing that caused them grief, and that was they had no child. And they grew poorer and poorer every day until they had nothing at all. The poor man lamented night and day that a curse had been laid upon them. Off he went one evening and sat by the mill pond. There he wept. All at once he heard a voice. "Listen, poor man, I'll help you in your troubles. I'll make you richer by far than ever before. All you have to do is give me the living creature that you have not got at home." So the poor man thought to himself, "What is it that I haven't got at home? Perhaps a dog? Perhaps a cat? What could it be? Right you are, I agree." The poor man cheered up and set off for home. He was still on his way when his servant came running towards him. "Quickly, Master Miller, the mistress has just given birth to a fine, healthy boy." Well now, the miller ran all the way back to the mill pond. Come here, you evil spirit, you have taken my child." But no one appeared. Home he went and told what had happened. They threw their arms around each other and wept and wept. What was going to become of their child? When would that voice take him away, raise the boy as the light of their lives? They never ever let him near the mill pond. And when he grew older, they told him that he was not to go there because the water fairy would carry him away. And the boy never went there. He avoided the place altogether. Now they became wealthier than anyone in the village before or since. Where they laid down a florin, the next day there were two. Time and tide went by, and they sent their son to a master woodman so that he would be a forester. So taken was the master with the lad, so quick and clever he was, that the master gave him his own daughter in marriage. The young man went all through the forest hunting. One day, he saw a fine stag. He aimed at the stag, but the stag vanished, clean out of sight. Off he went again on the following day, and once again the stag was enticing the young man, and so it went on for 3 or 4 days. His wife spoke to him. "Where is it you go every day, neither eating or drinking, only concerned for your forest? But don't go near the mill pond, just so that no trouble will befall you." "I never go that way, my dear. I only go hunting in the forest." Once again he set off, tracked the stag, and brought him down. He thought of skinning it, but in skinning it, he got covered in blood, so he decided to go to the river and wash himself. There he set down his cap and his satchel. But once he put his 2 hands into the water, 2 mighty arms rose out of the water, fastened themselves around his neck, and dragged him in and under. His good wife was waiting for him at home. She ran to the forest to the mill pond, and there she saw his cap and his satchel. "Dear God in heaven, what my father-in-law warned about has happened." Up and down the edge of the waters she raced. "Give me back my good husband, water fairy." But the water was silent. She ran and ran until tiredness overcame her, and she lay down and fell asleep. In her dream she saw, not far away, a shack in which there lived an old woman who knew many, many secrets. She awoke, and just as in her dream, off she went to the shack. She knocked at the door and spoke of her problem in floods of tears. There, my dear," said the old woman. "When the moon is full, off you go to the place and sit at the edge of the waters. I'll give you a brush, and with it you must brush your hair." So the young wife waited until the moon became full. She went to the edge of the waters, let loose her hair, and began to brush it. And then, all of a sudden, her husband stuck his head out of the water, but he said not a word, and then he vanished again to the watery depths. She went home and told the old woman what had happened. The old woman said, "Tomorrow evening you must bring a spinning wheel with you, and there you must spin." And so she did. She brought a spinning wheel, sat there at the spot, and began to spin. And when she span, once again the water frothed, and her husband appeared up to his waist. But again they were not able to exchange a word between themselves. "Off you go, dear girl. This is the 3rd night. On this flute you should play a sweet, sad tune. Then you'll see what happens." And so it was. The young wife sat there on the same spot and played. At first the water started to froth, and in she jumped and embraced her husband. But then such a storm blew up that her husband was carried off to one shore and the wife to the other. They were thrown so far apart that she stayed on one and he stayed on the other. Then the man took work as a swineherd and the woman as a cook. The swineherd brought the pigs out to feed every day, and the woman brought food at midday to her master in the meadows. When she brought the food to the master, she saw that there was a swineherd off in the distance. So she walked towards him, and they began to speak. And as they spoke, the young woman asked the man where he had come from, and the man began to tell her of how he had been born, and how the water fairy had carried him away, and how he'd been parted from his darling wife. And as he told all these things to his own wife, her eyes opened once again, and she saw that he was her husband. Then they embraced and kissed each other sweetly and went home. They had many, many children, and they all lived happily ever after. This is the end of my tale. Hungarian Folk Tales. How I passed my childhood. Now, when I was born and all of 6 weeks old, out I went into the street on a hot summer's day, and I met a true old friend of mine, who was a bottle ahead of me and tipsy with it. So we made a pair of oxen out of mud, a cart and sacks to load onto the cart to take them off to the mill and grind them. And off we went. Now, in those days there was a water mill to do the milling, but it wasn't there. The miller was strolling up and down on the water, and so we asked him to call up the mill, and he waved for it and shouted until up it came and we could start to mill away. Now, the miller man didn't have a scoop, so he pulled off my head and used that as a scoop. So when we were finished and off I went on my way home, who did I meet but a shower of women and young ones who started to laugh at me. "What are you laughing at?" says I. "Ah, you don't have a head," says they. And that's how I knew I'd left my head behind in the mill. Back I went, put the head onto my neck, and off for home again. But the women and the young ones were laughing at me again. "Now, what are you laughing at?" says I. "Isn't your nose at the back of your head?" says they. So I gave my head a good twist to set it right and off for home again. Now that's when I remembered that I'd stuck my whip into the ground behind the mill pond. Back I went, but when I got there, what did I see but that a great big tree had shot up from it and my old whip was up at the top. So up and up I climbed, and there at the top, what did I find but a hawk chasing a whole cloud of little birds, trying to catch them any way at all. Straight away the little birds, one and all, flew right up my sleeves, into my shirt, and right up my legs, into my breeches. Quick as a flash I tied up my sleeves and breeches, and wasn't I happy that I'd caught so many birds. Yes, indeed. And all these birds in my shirt and breeches started off chirping and tweeting, and all of them giving off in their own language, until up they flew with me and carried me off far, far away. I saw the women washing and scrubbing down on the edge of the sea. They looked up and shouted out, "Look at that big bird!" But I thought I heard them say, "Loosen your shirt!" So that's what I did, and out flew the birds, and down I plopped into the sea. I made such a big splash that I emptied out all the water, and the fishes were all left around me. So I gathered up a fine lot of them. I didn't waste any more time there because I was far from home. So I set off back through Hotland. Now, Hotland is a strange country indeed, where they don't build their houses on the ground, but up in the air at the height of a man. So they need ladders to get in. The people in Hotland are all big and tall, and everything is big. Even the church was so big that there were 4 soldiers in there on a horseback, and when the priest chanted, "The Lord be with you," one of the soldiers spurred his horse and off he went, and he intoned it to the second soldier to the third to the fourth, and he sang it to the respondent. So long was the mass that the congregation could have done with a good breakfast, but that was no problem at all, since the altar was made of ham and the candles were sausages. And just as big and tall was the steeple of the church. When two carpenters were building it, they dropped their hatchets, and by the time one of them fell to the earth, it had rotted away. And when the second was in the air, a lark nested in it, and before it reached the ground, it had laid its eggs and raised its chicks. The bell was so large, the only way they could get it into the belfry was to carry it up when it was a baby and let it grow up there. It was hotter than hot there, so hot that all they did was slaughter a pig, put it in a pan and put the pan out of the window, and straight away they had roast pork. But I didn't waste too much time there either. I'd had enough and continued on my way home. That's how I got to Cold Land. It was so cold there that the white of an egg would freeze so brightly that you could read a newspaper by its light. You couldn't speak there unless you could read, because when a man said a word, it straight away froze in front of him and the other had to read it. But I didn't waste too much time in Cold Land. On I went, on my way home. By the end, I was getting so fed up with the journey that I stuck my whip into the earth and climbed up to the heavens. And there was my grandmother. "The best of the day to you, Grandma. Do you have some bread and jam for me?" "Oh dear, son," says she, "up here we don't really eat." "You don't? Then how do I get down from here quickly?" Then an old man arrived and I told him as well that I wanted to get back down because there was no bread and jam to be had here at all. The old man remembered that they had a chest of bran and we twisted a rope out of that. I could lower myself down. And as true as I'm here, we plaited it fine enough, but a mouse somehow got into it, and when I was lowering myself back down, that little mouse bit right through the rope, and I plopped down into the ground. I thought I was in the old town somewhere near the church, but I wasn't. I was at the edge of the new town, and I was well and truly drilled into the earth, so I shouted out for them to dig me out, but no one came. So I had to go home for a spade and dig myself out. And that's all I remember of my own younger days and how I passed them. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Little Swineherd. Once upon a time, over oceans deep and mountains high, there lived a poor woman who had a son, and his job was to look after the pigs. No matter what his mother tried to get him to do, it was always the same. There was nothing he could do right or proper, not even if you turned him into an angel. He was good for nothing at all. So anyway, this good-for-nothing of a little swineherd heard that the king would give his daughter's hand to anyone who could hide away so well that she couldn't find him. "Now then, swineherd, my lad," he said to himself, Roll your sleeves up, for there's a lot to win if you go about it the right way. So he gathered everything up, baked himself a satchel of scones, put on his heavy cape, and off he went. He walked and he walked through bushes and trees, over hill and dale, and still he couldn't find the castle of the king. For a long week he walked, ate the last of his scones, and still he didn't see a thing. And then he became so thirsty that his tongue hung out like a slipper out of a dog's mouth. Then as he went along, he came upon a well, and on it perched 2 white doves. Well then, the pair of you, I'll have to eat you both because I'm very hungry indeed. Oh, don't eat us, little swineherd. Draw us some water, we're so thirsty, and one good deed deserves another. And they begged him and begged him not to make a meal of them. So he went and drew up a bucket of water for them, and he himself drank his fill of the cold, sweet water. And so he continued on. But now he was so hungry that his stomach rattled like a dog on a chain. Then he came across a lame fox. Well then, lame fox, I'll have to eat you, I'm so hungry. The lame fox beseeched him not to make a meal of him. One good deed deserves another, little swineherd. I'll be able to help you. The swineherd's eyes were popping out of his head with hunger, but he decided not to eat the lame fox. He staggered on, and staggered to the right, and staggered to the left, and thought he'd never come to his journey's end. Then, far off, he saw a great lake. Down he went to its shore and saw a little fish struggling at the water's edge. Quick as a flash, he tickled it out of the water. Oh, please don't eat me, little swineherd. I'll repay you for your good deed. The little swineherd looked at the fish, and beautiful it was too, its scales all shiny and gold. He felt sorry for the fish and put it back into the water. On he went and eventually came upon another well, and on it perched 2 other white doves. Do you think I'm a madman? As sure as the sky above me, I'm going to make a meal of you both. So he tried to catch hold of the doves, but they begged and beseeched him not to do them harm. And the end of it was that he did them no injury, but drew them water, drank a great bellyful himself, and went on his way. Not long after that, he found himself at the castle, and at the gate stood the king. So what brings you to this far-off land? Said the king. So the little swineherd told his tale and why he had come, that he had heard that the king would give his daughter's hand to someone who could hide away so well that she couldn't find him. And that's what he wanted to try. Fair enough, my lad, said the king, but have you seen the 99 heads up there? Yours will be the 100th if you can't hide yourself well. The little swineherd looked around and turned to the king and bravely said, I'll do the best I can, your highness. On the following morning, the king came to him and told him to hide himself away before his daughter arose. The little swineherd made himself ready, and what did he see but the 2 white doves? Come on, we'll take you away. And the 2 white doves carried him off to hide him behind the sun. The princess prepared herself for the day. She went down to the garden, plucked the finest of the roses and twirled around. Out you come, little swineherd. There you are, behind the sun. And the little swineherd was furious and frightened. What could he do? Out he came from the far side of the sun. The next day dawned bright and clear. The little swineherd rose, looked out of the window, and there he saw the lame fox rearing up, waiting to take him away to the end of the world. The princess went down to the garden, plucked the finest of the roses and twirled around. Out you come, little swineherd, come back from the end of the world. And the little swineherd was forced to reappear. On the 3rd day he went off to meet the little fish at the lake, and the fish took him deep, deep down into the water. Not a living soul comes here. They'll never find me here. But the princess went down to the garden, plucked the finest of the roses, twirled around once, and called the little swineherd from out of the bottom of the lake. That's surely the end of me. My head will be on the 100th stake. said the little swineherd. He laid himself down to go to sleep, but all he did was toss and turn, writhe and wriggle. On the following day at dawn, he saw 2 white doves at the window. One of them flew off instantly, but the other one stayed. "Come as quick as you can. You'll be turned into a fine rose, and so will I." And that's what happened. By mid-morning, all the buds had blossomed in the garden. Down came the princess. She looked for the finest of the roses and found 2 of the same beauty. She plucked both of them and fastened them to her dress. Then she twirled around once, but she didn't see the little swineherd. She twirled around twice, and still she didn't see him. "Father, I can't see the little swineherd. He's hidden himself away so that I can't catch him." "He can't have. Just twirl around once more." So she twirled around once more for the 3rd time, but she could have twirled around till day was done, and still she wouldn't have caught the little swineherd. Then one of the roses on her dress turned into a dove, and the other into the little swineherd. "My heart's delight, my only love, I will be yours and you will be mine. Nothing in this world will part us ever." And they embraced and kissed and clung together like a bunch of flowers. Soon there was a wedding feast, and everyone was invited. And the swineherd king and his beautiful queen lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Lad Who Watched Over the Rabbits. Once upon a time, very long ago, and far away, there lived a king, and the king had a daughter, so beautiful that even the painters could not paint her beauty. Now there came a time for her to take a husband, and the king said that he would give her in marriage to the man who could catch the apple she threw among them. So they came together, the princes and the dukes, the counts and the gypsy lads, to catch the apple. But try as they would, not one of them succeeded. But one day who should turn up but a village lad? Once again the princess flung the apple, and the lad caught it as if it had been thrown straight to him. But the king was not overjoyed at this, that a come-and-go-as-he-pleases lad was to be his son-in-law. "Well then, young fellow, I don't know what kind of lad you are to catch the apple, but there's another trial in store for you. I have rabbits aplenty, and you have to watch over them. If you can watch them carefully, well and good, but if you can't, then it's off with your head." Now the lad was downcast to hear that he had to watch over the rabbits, for never before had he been a watcher of rabbits. And all of a sudden, an old woman appeared. She said, "Don't be downcast, young fellow. I shall give you a whistle, and when you go off to the meadow, all you have to do is blow it, and you'll see how useful it will be." Then they let the rabbits out, and they ran off in 1,000 directions. The lad blew his whistle, and the rabbits lined up like soldiers on parade. The king looked out and wondered what kind of lad could keep the rabbits in devilish good order. So the king said to his daughter, "Listen, daughter dear, dress yourself up as a poor young woman and take a satchel with you to the meadow and ask the lad for a rabbit, so that in the evening when he brings them home, there'll be one rabbit missing." So the princess dressed herself up in the clothes of a poor young woman, put a satchel under her arm, and went out to the meadow. "Good day to you, good rabbit herd. God save you. What brings you here, young lady?" "I'm not a lady. I'm just a poor young girl. I came to see if you could give me a rabbit." "Of course I can," he said, "if your highness will give me a kiss." "I'm not a princess," said she. And she was really fierce in denying it because she didn't want the lad to know who she was. But he knew which way the wind was blowing. "Well, just one kiss and I'll give you a rabbit." So the princess thought for a moment to kiss or not to kiss, but in the end, she gave him a kiss. Right away, the lad took hold of a rabbit and put it in the satchel for her. So she set off home. But she hadn't got halfway home when the lad blew the whistle again, and the rabbit jumped out of the satchel and scampered back to him. The princess got home, and the king said to her, "Well, did you get a rabbit?" She looked in the satchel and, sure enough, there was nothing in it at all. So she said to her father, "I tried and I asked, but he didn't give me a rabbit," because she was ashamed to say that she had given him a kiss. So the king said, "Never mind, I'll try." So the king dressed up as a poor country lad and took a satchel, and off he went on a donkey to the meadow where the village lad was to be found. When he got there, he said, "God save you, young fellow. How goes it with you?" "Well enough," said the lad. "I have the rabbits to watch over. Have pity on me, young fellow, and give me a rabbit, for I'm as poor can be, and sick, and I need the meat of a rabbit to give me strength." "Willingly," said the lad, "if you kiss the tail of your donkey." So the king thought for a moment, and in the end he kissed the tail of the donkey. Well then, the lad gave him a rabbit. The king took the satchel under his arm and sat astride the donkey. But he hadn't got halfway home when the lad blew that whistle of his, and the rabbit jumped out of the satchel and left it as empty as the day is long. The king got home, opened the satchel, and saw not a rabbit there at all. The princess asked him, "Father dear, did you bring a rabbit?" "Of course I didn't bring one. He wouldn't give me one." Evening came, and the king looked out of the window to see how the lad had lined up the rabbits to come home. Like soldiers on parade, in they came, and all of them present and correct. "Well done, young fellow," said the king. "You've done a very good job. You've passed the test. Now there's one more for you, and if you pass that too, then you'll have my daughter as your wife. Now I want you to tell me as many lies as will fit in a sack." So the lad began to think about what lies he could tell. All the king's councillors sat around in a circle with the lad in the middle, and he started to tell lies. Well, he lied and lied about anything and everything that came into his head. But the king called out, "The sack's not full yet. Carry on with your lying." So he carried on. "Well, you know, when I was looking after the rabbits, the princess came to me and asked for a rabbit and gave me a kiss in return. Well, didn't the princess grow as red in the face as a rose in bloom? She couldn't get over her shame. And after that," said the lad, "the king himself came, and I told him to kiss the donkeys." "It's full," shouted the king. "You don't have to say another word. A big sack full of lies." So the lad didn't say another word. And that's how the king gave his daughter to the lad, who watched over the rabbits. Together they lived happily and peacefully. And when the king died, the lad became king. His kingdom was so blessed that it's a pity he isn't still living today. And that's the end of my story.